microphone doesn't pick up your voice, then people like Muskogee at the VA won't be able to hear at all what you're saying. And if you start to get a little bit of feedback, since these are on, we've got this microphone here that they'll use at an issue. If you could just step just a little bit to your left to get it further away from it. Most of the time we don't get any feedback, but every now and then we'll just get a little bit of reverb.
So this microphone will also
Yeah, either one of these.
go to the auditorium.
Yeah, when all you have to do for it to go is just that little switch at the top, switch to on,
So I
and
don't
it'll.
need that for here.
Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and begin. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the future of GME training and do this in three parts. The first part is going to go over the current and past situation of various things that have affected GME training. The second part will be to go over the new Institute of Medicine recommendations, which are probably going to impact the future significantly. And then the last is just take a brief look at what impact all of this may have on the availability of positions for DO graduates. So to know a little bit about what's happening is that you need to know a little bit about the pipeline to GME. Let me just say, first of all, the reason for a lot of these changes and recommendations by the Institute of Medicine, that there is no single public or private entity that provides oversight of GME. It's done by several different agencies, organizations, so there's no organized oversight. That's why it's kind of had free rein to do what it wants to do. So if you look at this particular slide, there's currently 171 allopathic and osteopathic medical schools providing graduates each year to GME positions, and there's a total of over 20,000 graduates as of 2013, and this is increasing each year. There's about 29,000 available ACGME residency positions for these over 20,000 U.S. grads. And then in addition to that, there are over 5,000 U.S. citizen IMG applicants that are the applicants from the Caribbean schools. And then over 7,500 non-U.S. citizen IMG applicants, which takes us up to over 32,000 applicants for 29,000 positions. And then if they continue, we have about 2,900 AOA residency positions. If you take a look at the training programs as of 2013, there's over 9,000 ACGME accredited training programs, of which 4,000 of them are the initial residency period. That is the residency that you initially go into, like family medicine, internal medicine, orthopedic surgery, general surgery, ENT, etc. And then on top of that, the remainder are the subspecialty programs, like cardiology, gastroenterology, interventional radiology, hand surgery, and things like that. So the AOA accredited training programs as of 2012, there are 883 programs, in addition to about 130 traditional internship positions, which are not included as part of this 883. So in ACGME programs, there's about 117,000 total residents in training as of 2013, of which 97,000 are in their initial residency period and about 20,000 in subspecialties. And then you add that to that the 9,700 residents in AOA programs. So that kind of gives you an idea of training programs and positions. Now, all these positions are funded by various means. So all the cost and so forth for training a resident or a fellow come from these sources. And most of the funding comes from the Medicare bill, of which Medicare puts in about $9.7 billion each year to train residents and fellows. An additional amount is put in by Medicaid in most states, but not all states. And the total is about $3.9 billion by Medicaid. Now, when the states put in funding for Medicaid, what they put in is also equaled by the federal government. So the amount put in by the states is about half of $3.9 billion, but the net result is about $3.9. And then HRSA, another government agency, recently started the grant programs of the teaching health centers about 3 years ago, but this is only a fraction of the total funding and only $500 million from HRSA for the teaching health center training programs, of which we have 3 programs here in family medicine, pediatrics, and OB-GYN. And then also the VA funds residency positions. They fund about 10% of all resident positions nationally. Of course, some of our residents here go to the VA, and those positions are funded by the VA, and the funds come back to the hospital here. But the total national funding is about $1.4 billion. So that gives you an idea of the total funding. Now, there is additional small amounts of funding that are supplemented, and in some places, like practice plans may fund residents. Pharmaceutical companies may fund residents or fellows, and there's other very small amounts in addition to these, but this probably accounts for 98% or more of all funding of graduate medical education. Now, the reason I put this up here is because of the recommendations that are come out, why some of these recommendations have been released by the Institute of Medicine. But you can see back in the 60s and 70s, the funding of residency programs were based on the fact that most of the training occurred in hospitals, and a high percentage of the pathology was in hospitals. But if you look at, compare 1980 to 2010, the hospital days per 10,000 population has dropped from 13,000 to 5,000. So the pathology is no longer in the hospitals, but that's where residents spend their time. And the hospital discharges have fallen significantly. So most of the training is in the hospital, but the available pathology is not what it used to be 20, 30 years ago. Now let's take a look at another thing that's impacting the availability of graduate medical education positions, and that's medical school enrollment and GME applicants. There were about 125 allopathic colleges in 2002, and in 2012 that's increased 12.8% to 141 colleges that are graduating people that are going into graduate medical education. Osteopathic colleges have gone from 20 to 34 in 2012, and that is increasing significantly since 2012. Maybe another 11 to 15 new colleges on top of these. But just In that 10-year period, there was a 70% increase compared to 12.8 in allopathic colleges. So the student enrollment has gone from 68,000 to 80,000 in allopathic colleges to 11,000 to 21,000, almost doubling in 10 years in osteopathic colleges. And the applicants, if we compare over the same 10-year period, the applicants to GME programs, U.S. graduate applicants, which include DOs, went from 16,000 to 20,000, which was a 20% change over 10 years. And the IMG applicants, you need to look at this closely because this is going to maybe significantly impact the future. Non-U.S. citizen IMGs, that is the Caribbean, the non-U.S. citizen IMGs has gone from 4,500 to about 6,800, a 50% increase. But the U.S. citizen, the Caribbean applicants have more than doubled in the 10-year period. And those people are taking up many of the positions. So that's a 110% change, and those schools are continuing to grow at a rapid rate. So the total applicant pool over that 10-year period was a 33% increase, and it's continuing to increase. Take a look at now the GME funding source and the amounts we mentioned before, that Medicare is the number one funder at $9.7 billion, and 9.6 of this goes to acute care hospitals, such as this hospital. And GME funding is currently is separated into two different components. It's what we call indirect payments and direct payments. So I'll go over that in just a minute. And then we mentioned that Medicaid also funds at about a rate of $3.9 billion. So direct cost well, let's see. Let me just go back to this. Direct payments are the direct cost of educating a resident. The indirect payments is the amount that the cost apparently that the hospitals incur as a result of having residents in the hospital. In other words, it was originally felt that residents significantly reduced the hospital's productivity, and they increased the cost to take care of a patient, such as they proposed that residents order more tests than the attending physicians. It cost money to the hospital to reorient residents when they go from one affiliate site to the next, which takes personnel cost and so forth to do that. And then residents provide services that are repeated by attending physicians, so that adds to the cost. So those are what we call indirect payments, and you can see that the hospital receives about twice as much payment per resident for these indirect costs, that is the cost of decreasing their productivity, as the direct payments go. So that's how hospital gets paid by Medicare each year for residents, and it's divided into the direct and indirect payments. So these are the components of the direct cost of GME programs. So there's labor costs, such as the resident or fellow's salary, their stipends, their fringes, the money that's paid to faculty for teaching, the graduate medical education staff, such as Brenda and so forth, and attending physicians that may get paid for teaching. Also included are various fees and subsidies, such as direct costs include the malpractice to cover residents, conferences that residents go to, parking, housing, license fees, tuition fees for courses that may be gone to, which includes usually in the educational stipend, texts, laptops, and so forth. And then there's other educational materials such as simulation equipment that the hospital may need for simulation training, in-training exams that residents are required to take. And then also included in direct cost is the program administration cost. That is the overhead for space, for sleeping rooms, for staff space, recruitment costs, accreditation fees for when the AOA comes and accredits programs, retreats, orientation, credentialing, faculty development, and graduation costs. So all those are part of direct cost to the hospital. So let's go now just a minute to the next issue of sponsoring institution. Under ACGME, every residency program must have a sponsor. Now the sponsor can be a hospital or can be other agencies. We'll go over that in a minute. But sponsors have been divided into multi-program sponsors. That is, a hospital that would have more than one residency program. That would be a multi-program sponsor. So if it has, say, general surgery, internal medicine, family medicine in a hospital, that hospital would be a multi-program sponsor. But then there are some hospitals that have just one program, one residency program in that hospital, and those are single program sponsors. So you can see nationally that by far, way over 90% of the sponsors are multi-program sponsors, and there are very few single program sponsors. So of the multi-program sponsors, who are the sponsors in the ACGME programs? So remember, to have a residency program, you can't have a residency program unless you have a sponsor. So you have to be approved and accredited as a sponsor first before your program can be accredited by ACGME. So for instance, if this hospital decides to be the sponsor of their 16 or so residency programs, they must be accredited and approved by ACGME first as a sponsor. After they get accredited as a sponsor, then they can apply for each individual program as a program. So you can't get ACGME approval of, say, family medicine here until the hospital is accredited as a sponsor. So nationally, teaching hospitals, such as this one, accounts for about half of all the types of sponsors in the United States. 4,600 programs are sponsored by a hospital. And of that, the number of sponsors nationally, hospitals as sponsors, about 255 with 57,000 residents. Medical schools, though, can be a sponsor. So, for instance, OSU, COM, can be a sponsor for residency programs in the ACGME. And right now, nationally, About 3,000, over 3,000 programs are sponsored by a medical school, and there's about 80 medical schools of the 171 that are sponsors for residency programs instead of the hospital or some other entity. But then there are a few consortium sponsors. That is, the sponsor would be a sponsor of several programs at different locations. So, for instance, in the city of Tulsa, the programs at St. John, Hillcrest, St. Francis are actually sponsored as part of a consortium. Each of those individual hospitals are not an individual sponsor. But there's only 11 of those nationally. So it's not very common for consortiums to be sponsors. But in the AOA organization, as you know, we have OPTEs. And there are several OPTEs, and the one in Oklahoma, of course, is OMICO. And so OMICO could be a sponsor for a consortium agreement of various programs in the state. But the ACGME doesn't have a lot of experience with that since there's only 11 sponsors currently nationally. And then children's hospitals can be sponsors or a community hospital. But take a look at this because this is going to have impact on the recommendations that we'll be talking about later, is that there's only 9 community hospital sponsors nationally in ACGME programs. So community hospitals are not commonly a sponsor of programs. So another thing that's very important in the current situation have been the legislative milestones in Medicare financing of GME. Back in 1965 is when Medicare took over reimbursement and funding of residency and fellowship programs. That's when it started, and it was a cost-based reimbursement. In other words, whatever the costs were that the hospital had for training their residents, they got paid for that. And then in 83, the direct graduate medical education cost, this was added on by the indirect payments that we talked about. So this increased significantly the payment that hospitals got for training residents. But the federal government caught on to this very quickly and made some changes in 1985. And the direct graduate medical education costs were adjusted proportion to the Medicare days. So since it was coming out of Medicare, they said, we're only going to pay you for your Medicare days. So for instance, in the hospital, if you found out that your cost for training a resident was $100,000, but only 30% of your patients were Medicare, you didn't get paid $100,000, you got paid $30,000. And that's how it's currently done, is the direct costs are proportional to your Medicare days. Now you can see how this significantly impacts a hospital that has a lot of charity care and Medicaid patients and a low ratio of Medicare patients. You would not get paid nearly as much. So the safety net hospitals, such as this one that takes on a lot of charity care, does not get paid as much as a hospital that has more Medicare patients. And then the federal government again caught on to things and said we need to control this because hospitals are just taking on more and more residents and getting paid more and more. So we need to put a cap on the number of residents that will pay the hospital. So in 1997, the federal government capped the number of physicians that they would pay for. And of course, whenever they do that, they always do it retrospectively. So they went back to the number of residents that the hospital had in 1996, the year before, and that's what they were capped at. And so essentially, like the number of physicians this hospital is capped at, which is about 103, which is significantly below the total number of residents, which are about 160. They're capped at 103 and only get paid for 103. And then in 1999, there were some minor adjustments to the per resident amount reimbursement that was made. And then in 2003, hospitals thought that they'd get permanently paid for these capped number of residents, but then the government notified all the hospitals that if you didn't fill all your positions, then your funded positions would be reduced to the actual number of residents that you had. So if you were capped at 100 residents but only been having 80, then were only going to get paid for 80, and those other positions were made available to other hospitals that applied for them. Then in 2010, the teaching health center programs were started by HRSA, and then in 2010 also there was another redistribution of funded slots, and the reason the objective of this was to redistribute those unfilled slots now to low resident geographic areas, to rural areas. Just to show you how effectively the government did this, is that of the total number of positions that were affected, which were about over 300 positions, only 12 went to rural areas, 3%. So the objective was to send them to rural areas, but the big cities got most of the positions. So in 2010, new rules were set up to redistribute closed hospital slots. So when a hospital closes, those positions are not lost, but they're redistributed to other hospitals. So those are the various changes that have occurred over the years. This gives you an idea of the Medicare per resident amounts by characteristics. In other words, the per resident amount that the hospital gets for each resident. So these are actual amounts, dollars, that the various hospitals receive. And you can see the per resident amount for large urban hospitals was, and this is for directs now, the large urban hospitals per resident amount was $102,000 per resident. But since the large urban hospitals have a very low percentage of Medicare patients, actually they only got $36,700 per resident. Rural areas, which tend to have more Medicare patients and more Medicare days than urban hospitals because they don't have as many charity care cases and so forth, the average was about $41,000 that the hospitals received. And you can look at what impact it has of how many residents you have, total residents that you have in the hospital, and the impact it has on reimbursement. You can see it. Small programs usually get a little bit less than medium-sized programs, but there's not a big difference until you get to the very large programs of over 100 residents, in which their per resident share is about $34,000. If you look at the resident fellow stipends per region, and I've just put up here the resident stipends comparing PGY1 to PGY4, you can see that the residents in Northeast get paid more than the South or the West, and when you go up to PGY4, the Midwest does go up a little bit more. But generally, as a rule, the Northeast residents are paid more, and the South is usually the least, and Midwest and West is kind of in between. So those are the, as of 2013, the stipend levels across the country of PGY1 residents and PGY4. Now, these are the direct GME costs by hospitals. In other words, these are the costs that they supply to Medicare, their cost per resident. But they don't get paid that, but these are their costs. They get paid according to what their Medicare percentage is. But large large urban areas, the costs are about $142,000 per resident. That's what it costs them to train a resident. And rural hospitals, their costs are increased, and a lot of that has to do with their economy of scale, because they're usually smaller programs. And so they have to duplicate more services than, say, the large urban hospitals. But you can see the percentile cost comparing the 25th to 75th percentile. There is a large range of cost. In other words, some hospitals' costs are significantly less than $95,000, and others are up to as high as probably $180,000, $190,000. So there's a wide range of costs that hospitals supply to Medicare for their direct cost. So what I'd like to do now is go through, based upon all this information, some Institute of Medicine recommendations that come out. And I don't know if how many people are aware of it, but the Institute of Medicine was charged with recommending new changes in how graduate medical education should be funded for the future. And probably the United States Congress are going to follow many of these Institute of Medicine recommendations. And so there will probably be significant changes that do come about before too long. Now, the Institute of Medicine report that just came out is right here. So it's not a small report, but it was just released, and I've had this about two or three weeks. And a lot of the data I just showed you came out of this report, which was a 2-year study. Their first recommendation was to maintain the current total amount that Medicare pays for residents, that they keep it the same. That's the total amount. So they did not, the total aggregate amount, which includes directs and indirect costs that they supply, they want to keep it stable, not reduce it or not increase it, but change significantly how that money is distributed. And they want to modernize the graduate medical education payments based on performance to ensure the program oversight, there's oversight and accountability. So in other words, programs are going to have to develop new systems and to evaluate performance and demonstrate that to some agency. So they want to also incentivize innovation in content and financing of GME based upon a lot of new factors and what would qualify you for how much you're going to get paid per resident. And they recommended that the current system be phased out entirely so that there would no longer be the current Medicare system of reimbursement. Now, just to give you a little bit of information that the reason that they want to make these changes is that I showed you the increase in the number of residents that have grown significantly, and the reason that they capped the number of residents. But what is interesting is before the caps, the rapid growth of the number of residents in hospitals before the caps, the same rate of growth has occurred after the caps. So setting the caps had no impact on the growth of the number of residency positions. The hospitals just found out different ways to fund residency positions or just take it out of their budget and fund the residents. So for instance, this hospital gets paid for about 103 residents, have 161. So the difference is they had to find other ways of funding those positions. And also they felt by increasing the funding of residents that it would solve part of our workforce issues and put more primary care physicians out there. So in the 1960s, about 59% of residents went into primary care. And so they increased the number of physicians to increase the workforce. In 2010, that rate of 59% went down to 33%. So the increase in the number of physicians had little or no impact. In fact, had lessened the number of people going into primary care. Just to give you an example, in 1998, in internal medicine, of the internal medicine residents, 54% indicated that they had planned to go into general internal medicine. And then in 2011, 13 years later, this went from 54% to 21% of residents going into general internal medicine. The second recommendation is that the Institute of Medicine said we need to build a GME policy and finance and have a different financing infrastructure. So they are recommending creating a GME policy council, which would be made up of various types of experts in the field, and these people would be part of the Office of the Secretary of the U.S. DHHS system. So there would be a new council developed. They would determine how much hospitals and various other sponsors would get paid per resident and what would be the factors that determine payment. And then they would also establish a graduate medical education center within CMS that would distribute the money, but they would have to distribute it based upon the recommendations that come out of the policy council. And in their strategic plan, they included that what would impact how much you get paid would be where your program is located. If you were in a rural area or an urban area. And your specialty configuration of your hospital or your sponsor. In other words, if you had mainly non-primary care programs and fellowship programs, probably you're not going to get paid as much as if you have a high percentage of primary care programs. And that the hospitals and this GME Policy Council are going to have to confer regularly with back and forth between the accreditation and certification agencies to make sure that they're making changes that are going to promote the changes that is needed to provide health care in the United States. So there's going to be changes in who gets and how much money that you get if the IOC recommendations are followed. So they're recommending that more money go to programs that have a higher percentage of primary care, those that are possibly located in geographic areas of underserved populations, rural areas, and so forth. Whether or not this comes about will be another question, and whether or not U.S. Congress will go along with these recommendations. Another thing that they recommended that there be just one Medicare fund, and that payment will not be divided into direct and indirects. There will be just one. There will be one payment, and then there will be two subsidiary funds. An operational fund, that is to fund current programs that are in existence to continue, and they're recommending that 90% of the total Medicare dollars currently go to sustain the current programs, but over the following 3 years, this be reduced to 70%, and it remained at 70% of the total dollars for the next 6 to 7 years. And then the remainder of that money would go to a transformation fund. And that is, the money would go to hospitals that have new innovative methods for evaluating residents, hospitals that are putting residents into rural areas, putting a high percentage of residents into primary care, and so forth. So new innovative programs that are doing what the government wants, these monies will be in the transformation fund to support those hospitals. So this is a 10-year plan, and so at the end of 10 years, then 90% of the money will go back to the operational fund because these new innovative programs will now be established, and they'll get funded under the operational fund. So you can see they want to put the money where the money is needed to produce physicians that can take care of patients in our new system and in the areas where the needs currently are. So we mentioned on recommendation 4 is to replace the DGME and IGME with one payment system with a geographic adjustment, and to establish that program and implement the payment based on performance-based payments. In other words, what how many residents you're training in primary care, how many are going to rural areas and different things like that, and whether or not you're training residents to be able to fit in with the new system of care, such as Obamacare or the new system of that's being established by the government. If you're training residents to be able to operate in that area, you'll get paid more. And then the recommendation 5 was not to do anything about the Medicaid GME funding, but the states are going to have to demonstrate transparency and accountability as the same as what will be in the Medicare GME proposals, because it's a big mystery of how the Medicaid money goes and what it's based upon, because there's not much transparency and accountability with that funding, and they want to see more of that. Just to go back to one thing about rural medicine is that about 19% of the total physicians across the country live in rural areas, 19%. But only 11% practice in the rural area. So only half of those that live in the rural area practice in the rural areas. So that's kind of most of the recommendations that are coming out of the Institute of Medicine. And I just might mention one thing is that hospitals and other agencies have been asking the federal government for more money to fund residency positions, but Congress has not acted because they want to see what the Institute of Medicine says and what the recommendations are. So there may be some significant changes, but it's going to have to be at the congressional level before anything happens. So that may take a while. So let's just take a look at the second part very quickly: the AOA and ACGME Unified Accreditation programs. In this new system, remember that to have residency programs, you must be a sponsor. So sponsorship applications, whether it's from a hospital, whether it's from one of the orthopedic medical schools, a teaching health center, or an OPTI, if they decide to be a sponsor, applications can be submitted beginning in April of 2015 for sponsorship. Because you have to be a sponsor, accredited as a sponsor first before your residency can be accredited. And then the residency program applications for either ACGME pre-accreditation or regular accreditation can be submitted between July 1, 2015 and June 30th, 2020. Programs that are not ACGME pre-accredited or accredited by July 1, 2016 will be subject to the ACGME Common Program requirements for residents applying to ACGME fellowships. What that means is if you're in an AOA program that's not ACGME pre-accredited or accredited, you have up until July 1, 2016 to graduate and still get into an ACGME fellowship. If you graduate after 2016, your program is not yet ACGME accredited, then you cannot get into an ACGME fellowship unless you meet the very stringent policies for special consideration of AOA trained residents. So to get into fellowships, the AOA programs need to get pre-accredited at least by July 2016 for their people to be able to go on to fellowships in ACGME programs.
What does that include? Does that mean on-site accreditation review by the ACGME for all the AOA
Well, we've been told that pre-accreditation is going to be a fairly simple process, that if you're currently AOA accredited, you just need to complete the application and submit it and include all of the things on the application, and you'll be pre-accredited. So that apparently is going to be simple from what we're told. So that's pre-accreditation. But then during this period of time after that, then you're going to have to go through the full accreditation visit and meet all of the requirements. Now, in the pre-accreditation, there are requirements you still have to meet. So, for instance, like one of them that's been very controversial recently is the program director must be certified by an ABMS certifying board and cannot be a program director unless that's true. But now there are changes occurring. Family medicine has changed their requirement and are considering AOA certification for program directors. Internal medicine is doing the same thing, and other residency review committees by the ACGME are considering changes. So we'll see how that goes. But new AOA programs that are developed can be continued to be AOA accredited between now and 2020. But after 2020, that's it. There will be no AOA accredited programs that have not converted over to pre-accreditation or accreditation. And no new programs can be developed under the AOA after 2020. Now, the other thing is for new AOA programs, you must have a resident matriculated in your program by July 1, 2015 in order to receive pre-accreditation. So if you have a new program and you don't have any residents in it, you can't go through pre-accreditation unless there's a resident in the program by 2015. The last thing I want to just go over and just for people to think about is, will more slots be available to DOs as a result of the ACGME Unified Accreditation? Well, most likely, first of all, the growth of new AOA programs and positions will most likely slow. They're going to slow down, and there's not going to be a rapid growth of GME positions like there has been over the last 5 to 6 years. And the growth of new ACGME programs will also be minimal if current trends continue. So the development of new programs, ACGME, also are going to probably slow down considerably. Meanwhile, the number of graduates are increasing at a more rapid rate than new programs are being developed. The pool of U.S. and non-U.S. IMGs will most likely continue to increase. We saw a 110% increase of non-U.S. IMGs over the last few years, and about a 40-50% increase in non-USI IMGs. That's probably going to continue to increase. So there's going to be more non-U.S. and U.S. IMGs applying to programs. And under the new system, current U.S. MD graduates, U.S. IMGs, and non-U.S. IMGs will be eligible for current AOA accredited positions. So these graduates can also apply to the highly sought-after programs such as orthopedic surgery, radiology, anesthesiology, dermatology, and other programs. And the last thing is, will all current AOA accredited positions currently in existence become ACGME accredited? Will the small programs that have to meet all the ACGME requirements, will they be able to meet those, or will the requirements be changed such that it will allow these programs to be accredited? And that's another question that's unanswered at the current time as to what will happen, and will all our current AOA positions continue in the future as ACGME programs. So there's a lot of unanswered questions. In other words, the message that was put out is that there's going to be more positions available for DOs. If you look at all of these things that are available, that are shown on the screen, not more positions will be available, less positions will be available because of the competition of MDs, IMGs, and so forth for DO positions, and the growth of positions of GME positions compared to the growth of graduates. Now, one good thing about the whole thing about if the Institute of Medicine recommendations are followed, then new programs can be developed under this new recommendation if they're programs for primary care and if the new programs are in rural areas. So that's what the Institute of Medicine has recommended. So in Oklahoma, if the Institute of Medicine recommendations are followed and we have a high percentage of primary care residents in those new programs, or if they're in rural areas, then the number of positions will increase. So it could possibly benefit, for instance, our graduates. So there's a lot of unanswered questions. So in the remaining time, I'll open it up if anyone has any questions. Yes?
I was originally under the impression that the IMG situation was going to that international medical graduates being pushed out a little bit as before. Is that not? I mean, based on what you're saying.
Well, no, because they can still apply for the residency positions for the initial. Now, they would be impacted, of course, by fellowship positions because they would come under the common program requirements. So, yes, there would be some relief for fellowship positions. But for residency positions, that's not true. Unless, there's some change by Congress or something like that. But the likelihood of that going through is very unlikely. Yes?
I asked you earlier about whether this is going to be a gain or a win for our profession, and also as a follow-up, who was pushing this? You said you didn't really know. Will that come to light soon?
Well, as far as the unified system, of course, it was a decision by the AOA Board of Trustees, and it was also supported by the House of Delegates last summer. Now, the reason why it was done, the reasons given were that this is going to make available more GME positions for DO graduates, because right now we only have about 50 to 60% positions to take care of our graduates, and that's going to continue to go down. So the reason given was availability of positions. Whether or not that's the real reason is difficult. It's difficult to say because we don't know if actually the number of positions will increase. They could actually decrease. So.
Could it be part to, you mentioned Obamacare was taking about almost $1 trillion out of Medicare to fund Obamacare. Could that be part of the thrust to drive the engine to cut back on Medicare reimbursements?
Well, that's a good question. Based upon the Institute of Medicine report, they want to keep the funding the same and only increase, 2 to 3% each year based upon the cost of training residents of 2 to 3% per year. So I think possibly, everyone can think about, what Congress is going to do, but if they can control costs, they might go along with with it. If it's going to increase the supply of physicians and increase primary care and increase physicians to rural areas, if they see this as a whole package, then it might remain stable. It's just hard to say. It's all politics, of course.
Can you make a summary statement about the statistics on match success for carriers?
The percentage of DO graduates getting matched positions is actually is quite good, and probably equals that pretty much of MD graduates. And the question is how is that going to change? Because by 2020, probably there's only going to be one match system. People have proposed that with the unified accreditation system that would occur before 2020, but the most recent information is that there's probably going to be two systems that will continue for a while anyway until they get this all worked out. But I think our graduates will continue to do as well as they have in the past. Yes.
I think I still look at all this and I think what the ACGME side getting out of us? Like, I mean, me kind of entered it saying, hey, we'll get a more equal access, but I think there's some overlap. But I definitely think I hear a lot about primary care growth, a lot about rural growth, and those are areas we're really strong in. Um, but definitely the more heading with the subspecialized areas, some of our programs, it sounds like, will, I mean, I know that the ENT Academy sent out a statement to tell everybody and said basically, we definitely expect that some of our ENT programs will not make it through accreditation. So certainly we're going to lose access to subspecialty stuff and plus gain a whole lot of competition for subspecialty. I mean, do you really think that, I mean, we're kind of like setting ourselves on a trajectory to where DOs are a primary care only type?
Well, I don't know. I think we're going to know in 6 to 12 months. I personally talked to Tom Nasca, who's the executive director of ACGME. He's very supportive of DO programs. He does not want to see any of them lost because he thinks that we supply excellent physicians to areas of great need, and he's supportive of our system. But it really boils down to the individual specialty areas, the residency review committees, and are they going to be making conciliatory changes to continue our programs. There is some indication that some of that is occurring already, and will, and how much that will continue is a good question. We're hopeful that there will be some changes. They'll see light that in our small programs with smaller faculty and less money, we can put out just as good a physician as the larger programs with a lot more money. So hopefully the people looking at this and our people that we put on those committees, although they're a small percentage on those committees, I think they can have a significant impact. And if they have data to present to the residency review committees, that'll be helpful because these committees, they want to see data. They just don't want a lot of talk. They want to see data. But, if we get our data out there, we'll be in good shape, I think, to help maintain programs. But 6 to 12 months, we'll know. Any other questions?
One last one.
Yeah.
So residents that graduate from our programs during pre-accreditation, do they graduate with AOA, an AOA certificate, or when you're in pre-accreditation, I know you get this kind of like stamp of approval to enter
let's say your program is accredited as an ACGME or pre-accredited as an ACGME program in April of a particular year, and you graduate in June. You will graduate with an ACGME accredited program, even though you're only in it 3 months, because they're accrediting it based upon how that program has functioned in the past. So, and if it's met their standards, then you'll be considered ACGME accredited program graduate.
When do you see the joint match coming to fruition?
When? Well, they say for sure it'll be by 2020. A lot of people said within the next year, but the matching service is totally separate from the accreditation system. And they're not geared up to do that yet, and how they're going to do it. I would expect, I don't think it'll be before 2018, but I could be wrong. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.